Hello everyone. You might know me as the person in charge of the Swordsoul Master Guide for Master Duel. It's been more than a year since the guide dropped and the deck hasn't undergone any major changes besides new brews popping up like Super Heavy or Centurion Swordsoul. But as you might know by now, Tenyis will be getting new support in the future. I figured that I might as well do a video covering them and what lines you can do with them, but I thought it'd be better to do a more general discussion video on the future of Swordsoul that extends beyond the new support for Master Duel. So without further ado, let's just dive straight into the topic. Let's start with the main deck. Tenyi Spirit Shurya is a level 4 light worm tuner monster that's unlike the other Tenyis. If you control a worm or a non-effect monster, she can summon herself from the hand. And when she's sent to the graveyard as a synchro material for a worm monster, she can special summon any Tenyi Link monster from the extra deck, provided you lose 1000 life points times its Link rating. Let's get the obvious out of the way. The fact that she's a level 4 tuner that can special summon herself if you control a worm is insanely good, especially when paired with Moyi, Taya, or even Shadana, because Shurya allows us to push through Imperm even without Heavenly Dragon Circle. And as I said before, she has very good synergy with Shadana, so much so that Shadana plus Ashuna, or Shurya plus Ashuna, is a legitimate combo to get you to your Swordsoul engine now. And you might have noticed that she lets you summon any Tenyi Link from the extra deck. That includes Monk for a free non-effect monster, Shaman to revive more worms for extension or act as an easy fire monster for Protoss, and she also opens up the possibility of playing the Tenyi Link for Sahasrara. If we control a non-effect monster, Sahasrara gives our monsters targeting protection, which is very relevant against Handtraps like Imperm. It also makes our board really hard to push through when the opponent has to get rid of the non-effect monsters first. Some downsides to this are the fact that you have to pay 4000 life points for Sahasrara, but paying 4000 isn't too bad. Just look at your local hero player for example. Furthermore, it's an additional extra deck slot, especially when our extra is already tight. But I definitely think it's worth a consideration in TCG where we don't have Barone. The extra deck summon also comes up when we want to chain block or Chi-Shao. Previously, this wasn't possible if we only made Chi-Shao using Adhara plus Vishuddha, but it's now doable via Shadana plus Shurya. The downsides of Ecclesia have always been the fact that she's very vulnerable to Ashe going first, and you usually can't special her when you go first as an extra tuner, so she's more useful going second. Shurya fixes these downsides by serving as an extender for going first and second, while still handling some roles Ecclesia already has. I think an underrated aspect would be the fact that she allows you to chain block Bastia and Taya or Moyi when you're breaking boards. She even facilitates our going second plans by giving us either a giant beater like Sahasrara or Monk to enable the Tenyis that Taya will dump. I do think that she's better than Ecclesia in that sense, but Ecclesia is still worth seeing as a starter, so we should play Ecclesia still. Shurya is almost certainly a 3 of in our new variant of the deck. Next, we have a new field spell. Remember how we have 2 insanely good Tenyi spells? Konami seemed to realize the same thing and introduce a searcher for them, Eternal Perfection of the Tenyi. On activation, it can search Heavenly Dragon Circle or Vessel for the Dragon Cycle. Once per turn, it can tribute one of our worms to target one monster on the field and destroy it. And during the end phase, it can replace itself with a copy of Flawless Perfection of the Tenyi from your deck or graveyard. If you need a refresher, Circle can tribute any worm to search for any worm from our deck, and can banish itself from the graveyard while we control a non-effect monster to search any Tenyi card. Vessel dumps any worm from our deck and nets us an additional Tenyi if we control a non-effect monster. 2 insanely powerful spells that allow us to extend our plays and generate more advantage by getting various worms into rotation like the Tenyis, Longwan, or Protoss. The fact that we have a field spell that searches either of them now means we essentially have at most 3 extra copies of both of them. This means you can afford shaving down on Circle and Vessel a bit to fit the field spell in. the ratio that I'm most comfortable with right now is 2 perfections, 2 circles since you still want to open it off into dodge imperm, and 1 vessel. The pop effect can come up going second since we can turn any of our Tenyis into spot removal, and can work especially well with Vishuda. The replacement effect is something I'm not entirely sure on just yet. Flawless Perfection is worth a consideration since it gives your non-effect monsters protection and once per turn lets you draw 2 if your opponent special summons an effect monster, but I can't judge its usefulness in a best of 1 format just yet. I do think it can be good in best of 3 because you can side it out going second, and I won't underestimate how good it can be with Sahasrara on the field since it just makes your board a lot harder to break through. But for now, I'd experiment with only 1 copy of Flawless in the TCG and most likely 0 in Master Duel. Another relevant plus for Eternal is that if you feel like it's outlived its usefulness after the search, you can always just treat it as an additional pop with Baxia, so you don't have to pop any of your monsters. And as I said before, I would consider running 2 copies of Eternal. Finally, our boy Monk hit the gym, and out came Tenyi Spirit Mula Adhara. He's a level 8 Worm Synchro monster that can search any field spell on Synchro Summon, provided we have at least 2 Worms banished or in our graveyard. In most cases, we will be searching Eternal Perfection. While we have a non-effect on the field, he can attack twice during the battle phase and he can't be targeted or destroyed by the opponent's card effects. For starters, being able to search any field spell in the game has so much potential for abuse, but it's limited by the fact that we need our graveyard or banishment set up already, so we usually can't search one so easily via Moe or Taya plus a Swordsoul token as a first action, for example. But that's not to say Mula isn't an extremely good card that synergizes extremely well with Tenyis. The fact that it can't be targeted while we have a non-effect monster like Monk and can be chain blocked by Moe, Taya, or Shurya means it's very hard for the opponent to interact with Mula. Being able to attack twice also gives Mula a lot of potential to OTK, especially on an empty board. If we were to compare it to Draco Berserker, Mula can attack twice anytime, whereas Draco can only attack twice on monsters, but has the benefit of gaining attack so it could still be relevant for swinging over big monsters like towers. The fact that it's a Tenyi Synchro means it also synergizes with Shaman in the way that most of our other Synchros don't. Remember that when we use Shaman's effect to revive a worm from our graveyard, we are locked out of using effects of monster special summon from the extra deck except Tenyis. For example, previously, if you had to use Shaman to revive Taya or Moe for a Synchro 8 play, realistically you can only make Chixiao or Draco Berserker as your disruption. The Chixiao couldn't grab Emergence to get you any worm because of Shaman's lock, but now you can instead make Mula Adhara, grab Eternal Perfection, use it to grab Circle, and then Circle contribute the Mula or the Shaman to grab Protoss so you can have an insane win con against some decks. So that begs the question, when given the option between making Chixiao and Mula, what should you go for? In theory, they essentially achieve the same purpose in terms of searches, especially if you made them without your normal summon. Mula can get you to any worm in your deck via Circle, whereas Chixiao can also do such a thing with Emergence. In the case of making Mula with Tenyis, you can use Circle to get to your Sword Souls, and use Moe or Taya to make Chixiao. In this case, Mula is an extra step you take to get to Chixiao. Having Circle into rotation is also crucial since its effect on the following turn to get you a Tenyi can help you grind, but I consider this a very greedy line. If you were to go through Mula, but your attempts at making Chixiao after are interrupted, then you're most likely stuck on just Mula, which isn't an interruption, whereas making Chixiao and getting that negated is unfortunate, but you still have a monster negate on the board. There is no correct answer on what you should go for in every case, since it's up to you to evaluate based on the rest of your hand and what hand traps you like to play around. But generally, going for Mula is the grittier play, but gets you a lot of resources if it works out, whereas Chixiao is the safer play. It's certainly still worth 1 slot in our extra deck despite the potential choice paralysis when it comes to deciding between Chixiao and itself, due to the ability to search more pieces of your engine and put up a lot of pressure going second. As a side note, considering Mula can search any field spell in the game, it opens up a few options as to what we can feasibly play. You can search Secret Village in order to pair with Ecclesia or the Iris Swordsoul, or Fire Prison in the event that the format becomes very link reliant, and it synergizes especially well with Sahasrara. You could theoretically use these in the Master Duel environment, but I prefer signing them in a best of 3 format. Furthermore, these field spells have their own problems despite their accessibility. We don't have a reliable way of searching Ecclesia and having her be a part of our end board. and Iris is rather tricky to summon before the opponent gets a chance to use their spells. And generally, I don't think this justifies playing Iris in our list still. And Fire Prison is very format dependent and can be game winning, but can also backfire if the opponent cracks your board and puts up a link of their own, so we might be locked out of Monk. I cannot understate how much of these 3 cards open up in terms of line we can do with both the Tenyis and the Swordsoul. For example, the 1-card Emergence combo. Activate Emergence to grab Taya. Normal summon Taya. Use its effect to banish Emergence for a token. Synchro summon Chisha with Taya and a token. Channeling 1 Chisha to banish Blackout from deck, and channeling 2 Taya to dump a Shuna. Use Blackout to get a token. Use a Shuna from graveyard to summon Shadana from deck. Synchro summon Mula Adhara using Shadana and a token, and use it to search Eternal. Activate Eternal to add Circle. Link summon Monk with Mula. Activate Circle, tributing Monk to grab Protoss. Now you have 3 different attributes in your graveyard, with Taya being Wind, Mula being Light, and Monk being Earth, so you can banish them to summon Protoss and call Dark. So by rerouting our line through Mula, we can actually end on a game-winning Floodgate instead of just Chi-Shao Blackout with just Emergence now. Here's a line that you might be familiar with. Now we have Ashuna plus Adhara or Vishuddha. This time we're going to be using the new support to net way better follow-up for us on top of a Protoss. You special summon Ashuna, make Monk. Special summon Adhara, and use Ashuna to summon Vishuddha from deck. Then make Chi-Shao with Adhara plus Vishuddha. Use Chi-Shao to search Emergence. Then you activate Emergence to search Taya. You normal summon Taya, banish Emergence to get a token. You synchro summon Mula with Taya plus a token, channeling 1 Mula to search Eternal, and channeling 2 Taya to dump Long One. Activate Eternal to search Circle. Use Circle to tribute Mula to grab Protoss. Banish Taya, Mula, and Long One from your graveyard per Protoss and call Dark. Use Adhara to grab either Long One or Taya back. If you really want a Chi-Shing on top of this and you have a Long One discard, then feel free to. Otherwise, I think it's safer to add Taya back for guaranteed follow-up in addition to the Circle in your graveyard. So you have a monster negate with Chi-Shao, a Dark Lock with Protoss, and you have 2 forms of follow-up with this board. Next, we have Ashuna plus Shorya or Shadana. Special summon Ashuna, link it into Monk. Then special summon Shorya, and use Ashuna's effect to special summon Shadana from deck. Synchro summon Chi-Shao with Shadana and Shorya. Here you can go channeling 1 Chi-Shao and channeling 2 Shorya. Of course, what you summon with Shorya is dependent on what you play in your actual deck plus what you have in your hand. You can summon Sahasrara if you'd like to protect yourself from Imperm. Otherwise, summon the 2nd Monk, which is what I'll do for this line. Use Chi-Shao to search Emergence, then activate the Emergence to search Taya. Normal summon Taya, banish Emergence to get a token, and make Mula with Taya and a token. Channeling 1 Mula to search Eternal, and channeling 2 Taya to dump Adhara. Activate Eternal to search Circle. Use Circle to tribute the Mula if you summon Sahasrara, or the 2nd Monk to grab Protoss. Banish Taya, Monk, and Shorya from your graveyard for Protoss and call Dark. Use Adhara to grab Taya back. Similar to the previous hand, you also have Chi-Shao plus Protoss plus Taya in hand plus Circle in graveyard, but you have an extra Mula or Sahasrara to threaten a push next turn or to give your board a lot more protection. Note that you only have Shadana in your graveyard as a banish for Chi-Shao, and you might not want to banish it in case your opponent destroys your Monk so that it floats. So there's an argument to linking off Mula for a 3rd Monk just to have something else to banish, but I don't think it's necessary. Now we have Taya plus Shorya. You normal summon Taya, special summon Shorya. Make Baxia with Taya plus Shorya. Go channeling 1 Taya to dump Ashuna, and channeling 2 Shorya to special summon Monk from the extra deck. Now that you have a Monk, you activate Ashuna to summon Adhara from your deck. Activate Baxia, popping Monk to revive the Taya. Synchro summon Xiaofeng using Baxia plus Adhara. Use Taya to banish Shorya to get a token. Activate Adhara to add back Ashuna. Synchro summon Chi-Shao with Taya plus the token. From here, you can grab Long One for a Chi-Shing line, or Emergence into Protoss to call Dark, since you have Taya, Baxia, and Monk to banish, or Blackout. So the end board would be at minimum Xiaofeng plus Chi-Shao plus whatever Chi-Shao searches as an additional disruption or a floodgate. There are many other lines of course, but it's incredibly hard to account for all of them. I might cover them in a future video where I do test hands, but for now, it's best to especially recognize the synergy of Shorya with every other card in our deck. Knowing that she is an excellent extender that can pair with any of our level 4 non-tuners for a free monk or shaman, and that she has chain blocking potential, is incredibly valuable. Overall, I say these 3 cards are extremely useful in our deck. They might not raise our ceiling too much, but they certainly make our combos more consistent and more resilient to common hand traps, such as Ash, Ogre, Dominus and Imperm. Here's an example list from Master Duel. A lot of it is theoretical right now, and the hand traps could be changed to fit the format when a new support arrives, so take it with a grain of salt. Now that we're done with the good support, let's move on to the less useful but still worth mentioning indirect support. Ryu Ge is an archetype focused around summoning level 10 monsters. Despite the fact that Swordsoul doesn't care too much about level 10s, the Ryu Ge cards do have some synergy with our deck. I'll only talk about the relevant Ryu Ge cards to supplement our strategy. First we have Sosei Ryu Ge Mitzvah. It's a level 10 ritual dragon monster. The only effect that's relevant to us is the pendulum effect. It allows us to add a Ryu Ge card from our deck and then destroys itself to put it in the extra deck face up. The card we'll be adding most of the time is Ryu Ge Warzone. On activation, it allows us to take a worm, a dinosaur, and a sea serpent monster from our deck, add one of them to our hand, banish one, and then send the other to the graveyard, but it restricts us to only summoning monsters of those types for the rest of the turn, so no Baronne. Note that it can add any worm, so we can add any of our Swordsouls, Tenyis, or Protoss. And if we have Mitzvah face up in our extra deck, we can summon 3 Ryu Ge monsters with different types from our deck, graveyard, and banishment. The one most relevant to us is Genro Ryu Ge Hakuba. We can banish this card to add a Ryu Ge Realm Wyrmwind from our deck to our hand. And if a monster is banished face up while there are 2 or more other banished monsters, Hakuba can special itself from banishment. It can also return Wyrmwinds to the deck to add a Ryu Ge card from deck, graveyard, or banishment to our hand. As for Wyrmwinds itself, the most relevant effect is that any monster sent from the field to the graveyard during your opponent's turn is banished instead. So now you know what these cards do, but how exactly do they help our deck? Well, for starters, the Fusewell is insane in letting us add any worm from our deck to potentially start our plays. What's better is that you can also search it with Mula if you don't want to tribute one of your monsters with circles to search a worm. Furthermore, if you open Mitzvah via hard drawing it or searching it with Ryu Ge Rising, then you also get to summon 3 level 10 monsters for free. From there, you can go one of 2 routes. If you already have combo, then you can overlay the level 10s into Varudras, the final bringer of end times, which is an Omni Negate and also a worm, so you can make it under Warzone's lock. Alternatively, if you didn't open combo, you can add Taya and link 2 of the Ryuges, including Hakuba, into Reprodokas, which gets under Warzone's lock because it's a dinosaur. This also puts a worm into our graveyard for Taya to banish. As we mentioned before, Emergence is a 1-card Protoss, but that also applies to Taya if you have anything to banish in your graveyard. Protoss is made even better by Reprodokas' ability to change its attribute, so you get to decide which attribute your opponent cannot use instead of just Dark usually. Hakuba is also an interesting search target for Emergence or Circle because it's a worm. In fact, you can argue that you can just play Hakuba plus Wyrmwinds instead of all the other Ryu Ge cards. That's because if you can search Hakuba, you can search the equivalents of Dimension Fissure or Wyrmwinds. But of course, all this power comes with cons. You have 2 guards in your deck in the Dinosaur and Sea Serpent monsters you need to resolve Warzone. You can lower your chances of hard drawing them by playing a higher card count of course, but drawing them would be detrimental as you don't have a way to put them back into the deck. Mitzvah by itself is a guaranteed Swordsoul combo, but Warzone isn't since you still need to open a worm for a Moyi play or a way to dump a worm into the graveyard for a Taya play. Warzone also locks you into worms, which isn't too big of a deal since we're only giving up Baronne, but we can make Varudras instead for an Omni Negate. The Ryuges also have some anti-synergy with the Tenyis. Due to Ashuna's worm lock, you wouldn't be able to summon all 3 Ryuges off of Warzone since only one is a worm. If you lead with the Ryuge lines however, you wouldn't be able to summon most of the Tenyis from hand since they require you to control no effect monsters. And finally, you'd have to dedicate a few extra deck slots to account for the Ryuge lines, such as Varudras and Reprodokas. This could be dangerous since our extra deck is tight already, especially after the new support. Overall, I like these cards, and they certainly have a lot of potential to work with Swordsoul. I think a 60-card pile would be the way to go when building Swordsoul Tenyi Ryuge to minimize your chances of opening Garnets and to fit in all the necessary Ryuge cards. I certainly think it's a more realistic variant than Kashtira Swordsoul. We have a very promising road ahead of us, and I look forward to when we'll be getting these new cards in Master Duel so I can try them out. For now, that's all I have to say for this video. See you guys on the next... What? What do you mean I'm not done? I talked about all the new support. There's something I gotta read? Give it to me. Dominus Impulse. Oh. Oh no. We were so close to a perfect world with all the new support, but Konami decided to throw a curveball by creating 3 more Handtraps that are bound to give us a hard time. Let's waste no more time and start with the Mocharmies. As of recording this, 3 have been announced, but we only care about 2. They all share the effect of discarding themselves while your board is empty to allow you to draw cards every time the opponent summons from a specific location. For Purulia, you draw every time your opponent summons from hand, including normal summoning. For Fuwalos, you draw every time your opponent summons from the deck or extra deck. You can only use 2 Mocharmy effects per turn, so they can stack on top of each other only once. And during the end phase, if the number of cards in your hand exceeds the number of cards on your opponent's board plus 6, you have to randomly shuffle cards in your hand back to the deck to match that number. Now let's get the obvious thing out of the way. These were most likely intended to be more balanced versions of Max C, but judging by how things are going in the OCG right now, they might serve as additional copies of it rather than full-on replacements. Don't be surprised if you have to face 9 copies of Max C in the future. The reason I bring this up is because our deck already has an okay at best plan into Max C. Chi-Xiao Blackout might have been a good board by 2022 standards, but 2024 or 2025 decks are very capable of playing through this board. In the event that Max C gets banned, the Mocharmies are way easier to deal with, especially since your opponent can't just use them after they've established a board so you can push through it more effectively. However, being hit by them going first will still be unfortunate, as you wouldn't be able to go through your strongest lines, especially with the new support. That's not to say these cards are complete nerfs for us, as our deck can use them too to discourage the opponent from playing. This way, we can set up our OCK lines much more easily, especially with Mula Adhara's double attacking effect. Overall, I think the Mocharmies are fine additions to the game, but I do hope we don't have to deal with them in addition to Max C. Now we can move on to the actual problem card for our deck, Dominus Impulse. If the opponent controls a card, then you can activate it from your hand. When the opponent activates a card or effect that includes special summoning a monster, negate that effect and destroy it if you have a trap in your graveyard. Now, remind me what the Swordsoul monsters and Tenyi monsters do again? That's right, they all have an effect to special summon a monster. In other words, they're prime targets for Impulse. Unlike Imperv that requires the target to remain on the field for it to negate, Impulse negates the effect to summon entirely instead, so you can't dodge it with Circle. Because it's a trap card, you can't just use Callby on it either. Your best counter at that point is Red Reboot if you're really desperate to beat Impulse. It's essentially 3 extra copies of Psyframe Gear Gamma against our decks for Fire, Dark, and Water-centric strategies like Examine Snake Eye, Yubel, and Malice in the future. Gamma is already hard to play around, but now we have to worry about more copies of it from popular decks. We can't even use it ourselves, because if we were to activate it from hand, we can no longer use our light monsters like Chi-Xiao, Baxia, Ashuna, Shurya, etc., and that wouldn't be ideal. The silver lining is that it doesn't destroy unless the opponent has a trap in their graveyard already. We could play around it to some extent by using Longwand while we still have an empty field to establish a Barone for protection, but that's not always going to happen. While it is very hard to play around Impulse, the new support does alleviate that problem. Even if Moye or Taya gets negated, we can still start with summon Shurya as a backup plan. Still, after its release, you always have to think about the best lines to play around Impulse, especially if the top decks can abuse it. And that's it for the new Handtraps that can threaten us, and now we can wrap up with the video. As I stated before, I have a lot of faith in the deck after the new support. I think it's clear that the consistency boost will matter a lot, especially as the game's power level rises after each set, so we need to keep up to avoid power creep. Being able to access portals so easily will be a crucial tool in helping us combat it. But the future also contains extremely powerful stables that will serve to deter us. We can't do much about them aside from adapting to them, learning to play around them in this harsher environment, and keep doing what we do best. With enough practice, I do think our best pilots will be able to push through these new adversaries still, and come out on top to prove that Swordsoul still has teeth after all these years. And that's all I had to say for this video. I hope you enjoyed this little sequel / addendum to the Master Guide, and that you learned something from it to prepare yourself for the future of Swordsoul. Keep pushing, and one day, you will be able to achieve the eternal profession of the Tenyi and become a Master Pilot. See you on the next video.